Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK podcast, starring Alan Effin Stein, where he steers your effin career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Effin Reba. Alan, that was my way of teasing that this installment of SYCK Tricks may have your ears bleeding if you didn't notice the tag of explicit content. Am I doing okay?
I love the gratuitous use of the F-bomb. I live in Brooklyn. My parents are both born in Brooklyn. I was born with a potty mouth, so bring the effing curses.
All right, so before we get into this effing show, what's been new? You have exciting things going on each week, so I'd like to know what's new in your world.
Yeah, so my wife and I just recently celebrated our 18th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Which happens to take place on June 19th, which is now, as many people are aware, the holiday that recalls and remembers the emancipation of the last slaves in Texas back, I believe, in 1865.
Mm-hmm.
And the holiday was not even, I was not aware of that holiday back when we got married in 2004. But now I think we would have probably had different decisions of choosing when to have our wedding.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can see that. What'd you guys do? Did you go out to dinner? Did you go to the park? What'd you do?
We just went on date night locally, went to one of our favorite restaurants around here, Fonda. I think I might have got a third margarita instead of my usual two to celebrate the big night.
Yeah, three margaritas would knock me out. I'd be done.
I was pretty much done after that. I think it was like 2.5. Melanie helped with the other. I think I had 2.5 and she had 1.5.
All right. Well, we've kept it clean so far, but I know we're going to get a little explicit as we head into the show here. Why don't you let us know what we have in store for this? What I said, this effing episode.
Yeah, and people will understand the use of effing as you learn a little bit about Amelia. But Amelia and I met through a Columbia Business School networking event. So another dividend that I got on my $138,000 MBA investment. But we met there, and she will be sharing a lot about her career, how she's taken proactive charge of her career, how she's gone from a public school education at the University of Missouri in Mid-America to targeting her approach in finance in New York and landing at Columbia Business School. And from there, she moved on to a top investment bank. And now she is a coach, a career coach that helps with people getting into consulting and finance. And she takes a really great approach. She drops a lot of F-bombs. And I think the SYCK audience is going to really appreciate this one.
All right, sounds good. Let's hear from Amelia. We'll get into it right now.
She and I met through... How did we meet? Did we meet just through like a Columbia Business School event, I think?
Yeah, I think it was one of the virtual TBS alumni mixers they were doing during COVID.
Yeah, I think we've just been doing so many mixers during COVID and over Zoom. It's nice to eventually be in person. Maybe I'll meet you in 3D at some point. But I'm just going to introduce you with your LinkedIn profile because I think it's awesome. It's just 3 lines. And then I'll let you introduce yourself to the SYCK audience. So you say that I'm a certified life and career coach who helps bankers and consultants break free from the grind and do what they fucking love, although you have the asterisks there in LinkedIn. Columbia MBA, who spent nearly a decade working in finance and consulting, I coach on developing the mindset and skills you need to feel less stressed, more confident, and 100% clear on what the fuck you want in your life and career. So I will hand it off to you, but I love your gratuitous use of fuck. And for folks that are listening to this on the podcast, over Amelia's right shoulder, she has a sign that says, go out and fuck shit up, which is awesome. So I'll hand it over to you and you can drop some F-bombs yourself.
Yeah, you'll have to mark explicit on this podcast. No, I love it too. It's that sort of, I think, the vibe of a lot of the clients I work with, my own vibe. And I feel like when you spend a lot of time in finance and consulting, you're well acquainted with a couple of F-bombs dropped here and there. But it's great to be on, Alan, and thank you for having me. Like you said, I'm a life and career coach for bankers and consultants, and I help them break free from the mental grind of their career. So ultimately, they do feel less stressed and more confident and more in control and clear on what they want next, so they can create a career in life they fucking love.
Nice. And talk to me about your decision to go to business school. Looks like I think you graduated in about 2010, and then you went to Columbia 2017. So talk about like your first 7 years and then what led you to invest. Is anything like me? Mine cost me $138,000. I don't know if you got any scholarships or anything like that, but talk about your 7 years before and what led you to Columbia.
Yeah, for sure. So the 7 years before business school, I actually started off my career working in advertising. And it was a big global agency. They were based in Colorado, super creative shop. And it was known for being a grind within the industry. So it's interesting because later on in life, when I transitioned into investment banking and I was going through that recruiting process at Columbia, a lot of the bankers would talk about the lifestyle. And, they'd ask you questions like, are you sure you're okay working 90 plus hours a week, all those things. And it was just funny to me because that's actually how I started my career, was spending 90 hours a week in the agency, pulling all-nighters for creative reviews, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's sort of just, I think, how I was programmed to work. I was always grinding from the beginning. And so I did that for a couple of years, loved it. But the agency I worked for was really creative and I wanted it to understand more of the strategy behind things. And so I transitioned to brand strategy consulting. So still in Colorado, did that for about 6 years, which was basically me going all over the world and all over the country and talking to real humans about how they use different brands. So it could be Coca-Cola, it could be McDonald's, it could be Pfizer medication. And so I spent a lot of time with a lot of different people in their homes and focus group facilities, on client sites, lots of travel time. And no one in my circles had an MBA, or very few people, I should say, had an MBA. And one thing that was always really important to me was, getting a graduate degree, getting it from the best school I could. And so I sort of had to just navigate that process myself, what it means to, study for the GMAT, all of those things, do the interviews, network on campus. And so that's sort of what drove me to want to apply to Columbia. I felt like I was lacking in my finance knowledge, and Columbia obviously has a great finance program and is in New York, which is where I wanted to be. So that's what ultimately drove the transition.
Nice. And from there, it looks like you did a couple of internships and worked in banking at Evercore.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you made a pivot from the marketing world. Like, what were you doing? Would you call yourself a marketer previously?
I was a consultant previously. So I started off as an advertiser, then became a consultant, and then transitioned to
okay.
banking.
And it was like a management consultant at Egg Strategy.
Yeah, it was a brand strategy consultant. Yeah.
Okay. So on the marketing side, marketing consultant, and then you switch to banking, like to finance. How do you do that? I know a lot of people go to business school wanting to make a pivot, but you succeeded in doing that. Yeah. Like, how do you accomplish that?
Yeah. Two things: a lot of hard work and prep and commitment to the recruiting process. And then the second thing would be, I think, the Columbia MBA. So, I knew just based on where I was coming from out in Colorado, more focused on the marketing side of things and brand strategy, that in order to make a pivot into finance, I was going to have some sort of stamp of approval or some sort of seal of approval from somewhere. And that came in the form of an MBA from Columbia. But then when I got to CBS and actually thought about, okay, what do I want to do? I wanted to learn finance. Investment banking was actually very open to non-traditional backgrounds like myself. And it was very obvious that I didn't have professional finance experience. And that wasn't a problem because, especially with banking, it's something that you learn on the desk, learn as you do the job. But that being said, during the whole recruiting process, I really drilled down on prepping for technicals and making sure I was up to speed in terms of my knowledge of finance, my understanding of the 3 financial statements, all of the things that you get interviewed on when you're recruiting for banking, as well as the whole social piece and the whole coffee chatting piece. So, I think my first semester during recruiting, I did about 150 coffee chats. So that was literally going from campus in Morningside Heights down to Midtown and meeting with different bankers. And that's really the human side of things, which that was the easy part to me, right? Because based on what I was doing in consulting, I was traveling all around the world, talking to people in their homes and getting to know them. And so that was the easy side for me. The side that I really had to focus on drilling down was the technicals and making sure I was prepped for that.
Let's get this party started with the first SYCK trick on how to build a network.
So you brushed up on your technical, but you also understood the importance of building that network out. How did you think about who to reach out to? So you have the Columbia alumni base, which I think is like 40,000, 50,000. I don't know, a ridiculous amount, but you're not going to reach out to everybody. You never reached out to me.
Yeah.
I'm not insulted, but it would have been weird if you were trying to reach out to me for a banking role.
Yeah.
How did you start to cull down who you're going to reach out to?
Yeah. So thankfully, if you decide that you're recruiting for banking at Columbia, and that process happens very early, I'd say within the first 2 weeks after you start first semester, first year, all of the MBA programs or the top MBA programs have a pretty defined system and process that you go through. So it starts with, 20 plus banks coming to campus, doing a firm-wide presentation, telling you about the bank, about the types of deals that they've worked on recently. And then at the end, there's a networking half hour, basically, where they bring in a bunch of bankers and you just get to know them and you get to ask them questions about the job. From that, the goal of those is to get as much information about the bank, but also get business cards from the bankers you talk with. And then from there, it's just a matter of if you liked what you heard in the presentation, if you're excited about the deals the bank's working on or has worked on, and if you enjoy talking to the bankers at the end, that's who you're going to reach out to first and see if they'd be interested in grabbing coffee with you. And then it sort of just goes from there. So it's, this has been a couple years now. But I want to say it's about 2 weeks of all the banks coming to campus, doing firm-wides, you getting to know them. Then it's about 4 weeks or so of coffee chatting and just getting all the business cards that you can from the firm-wides, reaching out to people, asking them to introduce you to more people. Sometimes it happens where you'll be brought in to talk to one banker and then they may really like you or you may really connect with them. And so they'll ask you just to stay longer and, hey, I want to introduce you to more of the team. And so you might end up, thinking you just have one coffee chat. And by the time you leave, you've talked to 5 different people. So it really is just about putting yourself out there and looking for ways to connect and always asking the person that you're talking to, is there anyone else that you think I should meet? I think that was really key.
That's some SYCK advice there. So not only are you getting information from this current person that you're meeting with, but you're also either trying or just sometimes stumbling upon another contact.
SYCK advice on landing that meeting.
Are there any tricks that you did, or not tricks, but are there anything that you do to try to increase the likelihood that you'll get not just this meeting, but then additional meetings that could be relevant for you?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the very first thing I did was I really grounded myself. And before every single coffee chat, I told myself, I'm going to learn something interesting about this person. And I just decided ahead of time that it would be a good interaction. So I feel like I went into every single interaction looking forward to it and also coming at it from this place of curiosity. So the banker I'm speaking with is the expert in their role. And they're this wealth of information about the job, about the bank, about the firm, et cetera. And so I really feel like going into every interaction with a genuine sense of curiosity, asking good questions, prepping ahead of time the questions you want to ask. I also made 1-pager cheat sheets on all of the banks that I was interested and in the process with, where it would just have, key members of the exec team, their names, recent deals that the bank had worked on, important multiples for those deals, or just things in the news that were tied to the bank itself. And so I had that so that I could actually speak to a little bit about the bank already or go into the interaction feeling like making the person feel like I actually knew something about them and about the firm, and I was excited to be there. So I think that really helped too.
So interesting. You created a one-sheeter or like a data sheet for each of these banks that you were focused on.
Mm-hmm.
And did you have maybe a universe or a subset of banks that you were looking at? So you mentioned about 20 came on campus. Did you complement that with others as well, or you stuck just to the ones in your backyard?
So I stuck to the ones that came to campus. And within that, I really targeted, which was the recommendation that the investment banking club through CBS gave us, to stick to like 12 to 15 and focus on that. And just, keep connections warm at 12 to 15 banks throughout the entire recruiting process, which essentially lasts all of first semester. And so, there were some banks that I knew even without, after the first firm-wide, just culturally, we weren't necessarily a fit. So I think it was also helpful to make firm decisions on banks that you're not interested in talking to. There were also banks that, I wanted to have exposure to different kinds of transactions that were large in size. And so, there's a certain level that I decided I wanted to focus on. And so that helped me make decisions where to focus my time and energy as well. And yeah, I think, focusing on 12 to 15, having those one-page cheat sheets for 12 to 15, making sure I was always at least in contact with one person and, not more than a week passed between me talking to someone at the particular banks I was focusing on. I think all of that really, really helped and made for a really good recruiting process.
So you took advantage of the tremendous benefit of working for one of the top, to go into the school at one of the top MBA programs in the heart of New York, where the finance capital is. What advice would you give to people that don't have the privilege of going to Columbia Business School, may not have all those companies coming to them, but for folks that want to take a more proactive approach without this privilege, what sort of advice would you give them?
Yeah, so I'll actually answer that question drawing on my experience getting into Columbia versus my experience recruiting for investment banking. So I did my undergraduate at the University of Missouri. I studied journalism, which is a fantastic school for journalism, but it's not an Ivy League where, there's sort of the assumption then if you do an Ivy League undergrad, you should be able to get into an Ivy League business school. And I also mentioned earlier that when I decided to get an MBA at Columbia, I had very few people in my professional or personal network who had an MBA, period. I didn't even know one person personally who had an Ivy League MBA. And so what I did is I had my best friend from childhood. She went to Harvard. Her best friend from Harvard went to Stanford GSB. And I asked her, that was one person I knew who had an Ivy League MBA. I asked her to put us in touch. And so the parallel advice I'd give, and from there, I did the same thing I did when I was recruiting for banking. After we chatted, I asked her, is there anyone else from GSB or elsewhere in your network that I could connect with? And it grew from there. And so not only was I meeting more people who were coming from the world I wanted to be a part of, but I was learning helpful information about the process of applying to a school like Columbia. So the first piece of advice I would say is just, it only starts with one. You only need to know one person. You only need to make one connection with one person. And if you really take advantage of that connection, if you care about hearing what the person is saying, if you focus on connecting with the person, asking good questions, and then ending that interaction with, who else do you think I should talk to? It just opens up from there, and it keeps opening up from there.
And again, more SYCK advice from you, Amelia. You start with one and you have good conversations. I'm sure all the conversations were not great, but I'm sure some of them were good and some of them were fruitful. And you cast a wide net.
Yeah, you only need one. That's the beautiful thing. And, the other thing I would say is I kept a chat log, a coffee chat log when I was recruiting for investment banking. I kept a MBA chat log when I was, figuring out how to apply and get to Columbia. And I would note obviously the name of the person I spoke with, the date we interacted, but I would also note, little fun facts about them, where they went to school, if they mentioned that they, went out to some place that weekend or whatever, just these little personal details that then when I would always write a thank you note after every interaction, which is a huge piece of advice as well, make the thank you note seem personal. So I would always reference some personal detail from our interaction in the thank you note. So it felt more custom and heartfelt and stuck out to them. And so that was another thing that worked well.
And you referenced earlier that you had about 150 coffee chats while at Columbia. So not only were you strung out on caffeine, but it sounds like you were also keeping methodical records of this as well.
Yes.
Were you goaling yourself either on a weekly or monthly basis, or were you just tracking this to be like, hey, the more of these meetings that I have, the better?
So I wanted to have enough coffee chats that kept me warm in the process with 12 to 15 banks. So I think it can be a bad thing if you don't have any sort of direction and you just step into a process saying, I want to talk to as many people as possible. That's really not the best use of your time, especially if you're recruiting for banking in New York, because there are hundreds of bankers in New York, right? Thousands of bankers in New York, right? So you just don't have that time. So I identified the banks that I really cared about. And even within that 12 to 15, right, I had like my A list, my B list, my safety banks. It's sort of like, undergrad application process as well. And so I really just made sure that I had a warm connection at each of those places. And if I didn't, then that's the bank or that's the banker that I would reach out to next. And when I say warm, for me, it was like I wanted to at least talk to the bank, someone at the bank weekly.
Yeah. And you also send thank you notes.
You're going to want to write this SYCK advice down.
How would you advise people? Some people are hesitant to reach out for help. Did you ever get your head bitten off? Like, what was the worst outcome in all of these outreaches to like figure out how to get to Columbia, to figure out how to get to Evercore? Were there any bad instances or bad meetings that were a waste of your time, or rude people or people that didn't show up?
Yeah. So I think asking for help is one of the most important things you can do. Huge shout out to Columbia's investment banking club, who pairs you with a second year mentor. And I had a fantastic mentor who helps you through the process and lets you know exactly what to expect before each next stage of the process. So just having that confidence and that security of knowing you have that person that's helping you along, it totally makes your process. So get that mentor, get that person who, even if they're just 1 year ahead of you, they're one step ahead of you, they can give you so many golden nuggets of advice and it will change your entire process. You would be surprised. I know sometimes to your point, sometimes we think that we're a little intimidated to reach out to someone, but you would be so surprised at how willing people are to help. Like human nature, when we help someone, we feel good. And so I've found I never had a bad interaction where someone yelled at me for reaching out to them. At worst, it was a non-response, right? Like at worst. And that actually happened rarely. People want to help. They're willing to share their knowledge and their insight. And it's not as scary as we make it out to be in our brains at all. The worst you're going to get is a non-response. And at that point, nothing's lost because It's not like you were in contact with them before you reached out.
Yeah. And I think that's how we met. One of us probably chatted with the other person at some Zoom event. And
exactly.
Now we've become friends because of that. Yeah. Are there tips or tricks that you, like, it sounds like you have a very good response rate. You're saying most people are replying to you.
SYCK trick number 4 is about one of the hardest things to do, reaching out for help.
What are some tips or tricks that you use when you reach out coldly to somebody to try to get them to respond to you? And what are you asking for in that initial reach out?
Yeah. So I think, I can speak to cold outreach in a second, but first I would just say, use your warm connections, right? If you know someone who knows someone, always start there, because the chance that you get a response from that, you're golden.
Infinite, yeah.
Right. So start there. for sure. In terms of cold outreach, then I always tried to focus on, again, referencing some sort of connection that we had. So whether if you're just scouring people's LinkedIn profiles, right? Maybe you went to the same undergrad or you were a part of same undergraduate groups, like affinity groups or organization, or, where they went to high school is the state you're from, some sort of connection in any way, like look for something. And if that's not there either, and it's just a total true cold call, I don't know this person at all, or cold outreach, I don't know this person at all. I always try to frame it in a way, I try to frame that conversation in a way of asking them, like, I am looking to them as the expert and I am interested in knowing more about them and I'm excited to know more about them. And, let me know if you'd be willing to schedule some time to chat. I like to keep it light. I like to keep it fun and friendly and short, right? Because people don't have a lot of time. And so they're not likely going to even read a message that's 5 paragraphs long. You're just sharing how much you love the company that they work for and you want to know more about it. Like that's not even getting read. Yeah. So keep it light, keep it short, and always just end with, would love to set up some time to chat if you'd be open to it, or actually a question like, would you be open to chatting for a bit?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Robert Cialdini, he talks a lot about the power of influence. And if you make people feel like respected, you use their name and you're seeking their advice, essentially. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like to give advice and you're saying that, hey, you're an expert here or something, and I'd like to learn a little bit from you.
SYCK trick number 5, building connections is a pathway to success.
You set your sights on a top MBA program in New York, you landed that goal. Then you got to Columbia and you set your sights on a top investment bank, and Evercore, I'm assuming, was in your 12 to 15.
Yeah, they were my number one. I really wanted that. Yeah.
Awesome. And it sounds like Columbia was your number one too, because you wanted New York and you wanted finance, but then you were there for like a little bit over a year. So talk to me about that. Like you achieved this goal, and was it more about chasing the goal, or what led you to leave Evercore? Like just over a year later.
Yeah, I love this question. So coaching actually led me to leave Evercore. And I love sharing this story because I think that it hits on some of the fears that a lot of high achievers that I know are listening to this podcast and that I work with have when it comes to your career, which is, a few things, right? So for me, I did the summer internship, did the little over the year there. And to be clear, I actually loved my experience at Evercore. It was exactly what I thought it would be. What I learned through that process was that I am not meant to be a banker. That's not my life passion. At that point, it's a lot of time spent behind Excel spreadsheets, and that's not who I am. I love connecting with people. I love thinking, big picture and more, high level strategic thinking. And so, I think what a lot of us who are maybe feeling unfulfilled at work do is we try to fit a square peg into a round hole of like, I've put so much into going after this. It's very outwardly prestigious, so to speak. It's well respected in my social circles or my family or, peers, whatever, but it's not me. And when we don't listen to that voice that's saying, this is not me, that creates a lot of negativity and resentment and burnout later on down the road. And so for me, it was just a matter of right before I hit the desk as a full-time banker, I discovered coaching and basically started applying the tools that I use with my clients and teach to my clients day one that I hit the desk. And I noticed that I was having a drastically different experience than my coworkers in terms of managing burnout, managing imposter syndrome, feeling less overwhelmed. Nobody likes working a 90-hour work week. And I'm not saying that that's fun, but just having these tools and this skill set, it creates a 90-hour work week can still feel very different based on how you're thinking about it and how you're managing your brain and your emotions around it. And so because I saw such the shift in my own self in terms of feeling better at work, feeling more confident at work, feeling less overwhelmed, and also trusting myself and trusting that voice in my head that was saying, this job isn't you, that it actually gave me the courage to listen to that voice and to go out to decide and create a career and a life that I fucking love and actually make that decision for myself before the 2-year mark, which is, the normal. Usually people give banking and consulting jobs like 2 years. And then, it's not unexpected to leave at that point.
At what stage, like on LinkedIn, it says you were there for a year and 3 months. So like 15 months at Evercore after your internship. You did your internship and then you came back. At what stage do you think you had said in your mind that I'm leaving Evercore and that I'm pursuing coaching? So was it simultaneously like swapping one for another? And if so, like when did you come to that decision? Was it like at that 15-month mark? You're like, I'm done. There was probably some thinking up until that point.
Yeah, I want to say it was around it was definitely before the year mark. And I was working on a really big deal with an amazing team. And I did not want to leave them hanging in any regard. And so I ended up giving quite a bit of a heads up just so that there was a good transition process. And another thing too, that I was dealing with at the time were just some health related issues that had come up. And so I think that was a good awakening too, of just listening to your body and trusting yourself. A lot of times when we keep shooting for the stars, there are physical ramifications of that. And so this was all sort of happening at the same time. And I think that also gave me the clarity I needed to just be like, this is the best decision for me. And I'm going to make this change. So I think the saddest thing for me is when I hear clients or just people in the industry, whether it's finance or consulting or elsewhere, they're having thoughts like this isn't me, or their health is suffering or whatever. And yet they're continuing to grind it out and push through. And, a big part of the work I do with clients is empowering them with the tools that they need to feel confident making a different decision for themselves and to take care of themselves too.
What are some of those tools or tips that you work with your clients? I'm assuming it's not unique to bankers or consultants.
No, this is just a human problem, right?
Yeah, no, I've gone through it, and I was a banker at some point in my life. I've consulted people. I never got paid for it, but yeah, like what are some of the problems that people come to you with, and how do you help them make these decisions to move forward?
Yeah. So, especially just given the types of clients I work with, one of the biggest problems I hear or thoughts I hear is that I have no control over my schedule. And yeah, that's very common, right? Because you can't control when your MD is going to hit you with a 10 p.m. please fix. You can't control if something goes crazy on the deal and you have to, work throughout the whole weekend. But the first thing is recognizing areas where you do have control in your life and taking small steps to find space where you can create some time for yourself. So I always start just by simply acknowledging that sometimes a 5-minute break is all that you need. And so working with clients to practice building in 5-minute breaks into their schedule, setting a calendar reminder 3 times a day for 5 minutes that literally says, step away from your monitors. Go take that time, walk around, walk outside, get a drink of water or coffee, whatever you need, breathe, right? It's like self-care can happen in increments as small as 5 minutes. And those little things add up and make a huge difference over time. And then another thing too is a lot of clients, feel as though, and I know a lot of us feel when we're working all of the time and we can't shut off from work, or we can't delegate things. There's a real fear around just not being on 24/7. And so I work with clients to practice something as simple as, I feel like so many of us can relate to being invited to 20 meetings in any given week. And maybe we're needed for like 7 of them. Yet we tell ourselves that we have to be at everything because we're worried about what the team's going to think if we're not there. We're worried about what if we miss something? What if we get fired? Like all of the things, right? And so even something as simple as, I'll do this with clients, we will practice denying 1 meeting a week and just getting comfortable declining 1 meeting that's coming through that they decide is the least important meeting so that you prove to yourself like, okay, nobody died here. I didn't get fired. My team doesn't hate me. My MD doesn't hate me. Nothing fell through the cracks. And looking for little ways to just create little pockets of space for yourself. So you start to feel like you do have some control over your calendar and you recognize that control. Another thing that I work with clients a lot on is perfectionism and imposter syndrome. And I think that's really, really common, right, among high achievers and type A personalities. And so in terms of imposter syndrome, like feeling like you're not good enough, no matter what anyone, because a lot of us who are high achievers and we've created great results for ourselves, we get great feedback from our superiors, from the external world, but we don't truly believe it for ourselves. We don't see our successes. We don't see what we're good at. A really simple exercise that you can start doing is just start a success file or a wins folder, which is literally an Excel spreadsheet that's saved on your desktop or a Google sheet, up in the cloud. That's you logging at the end of every week 10 wins you had. And you can even do it 1 win a day too, if you just want to do 7 a week, right? Of just whether it was someone saying something good to you, positive feedback, whether it was a moment that you were proud of, that you were really proud how you handled this client objection or this client request, and actually giving your brain evidence that it can see that you are doing a good job, you are smart, you are successful, you are good enough to be in the position that you're in. We need that concrete evidence because actually seeing that quiets that internal chatter that tells us we're not good enough. So that's a really simple practice you can do. In terms of overcoming perfectionism, recognizing and actually defining what is perfect to you. When you ask yourself that question, what most people very quickly realize is that they don't even know what perfect is to them. And so it's this moving goalpost that we can never achieve. It's like a game where we're meant to lose. And so just having that realization can ease up the drive to be perfect because you're recognizing and you're realizing that perfect doesn't exist. I don't even know what perfect is. I also work with clients to just understand and accept that feedback is inevitable. No matter if you spend 2 hours on something or 20 hours on something, if you're not top of your team org chart, you're going to get feedback 100%. So if you know that, and if you just accept that going in before you start doing the task or working on the project, whatever, how would you approach it? Knowing that no matter what, you're going to get feedback. That can often help overcome some elements of perfectionism. So it really goes back to, there are things you can do and skills you can get good at. But then there's also the mindset piece, which is how are you going to change how you're thinking about this, right? If you know feedback is inevitable, let's think about how you're going to approach the task now and shift how we're thinking about it. And then the last thing I work with clients on is figuring out what they want next. So immediate next and then long-term next. And so this is really fun to do. I feel like a lot of the thoughts we have that hold us back from making decisions are things like, but what if I fail? But what will other people think? That was a big one for me when I was making the decision to leave investment banking to start my own business as a coach. I actually wasn't afraid of failing because I feel like I've been able to develop a mindset of guaranteed success through the tools that I teach my clients. But I had so much fear around what would other people think. And so that's what I had to work through and really coach myself through and work with my own coach to get over. But so, what if I fail is a big one? What will other people think? And the biggest is I don't want to make the wrong decision. Another big one is I don't know what I want. And I always say that thought that you don't know what you want, that is the thought that is preventing you from figuring out what you want. Because when you're stuck thinking, I don't know what I want, and you're not pushing past that, you're not asking questions of people in other industries that you might be interested in learning more about. You're not making decisions about what you do want. So you can I always say your current job is a gold mine of information in terms of giving you clues to figure out what you might want next. So I always have clients when they come to me saying, I don't know what I want, I don't know what I like. I say, look at your current job. Make a list of 30 things that you like about your current job. And if you can't do that, because a lot of my clients come to me feeling very burnt out and resentful and frustrated with their jobs, I say, make a list of 30 things you hate about your job. And the opposite of that is what you would want to look for in your next. Like what you don't like about your job is actually just as helpful as identifying what you do like. So you know so much more than you're giving yourself credit for. You actually do know what you want. You just haven't taken the time to ask yourself, what do I want? Let's make some lists. Let's start looking around my current environment for data.
And it seems like when you're working with clients, a big first step is identifying what they want, what that goal is.
Exactly.
Before they set out on a path. And it sounds like you have some good advice on how to set up that path, but I'd love you to expand on that outside of the networking. So you work with clients to figure out what they fucking love to do. Mm-hmm. And often, I guess those clients are not doing what they fucking love to do because they probably wouldn't have been upset enough to come to you. Mm-hmm. So when they identify what they want to do, how do you help them get there?
Yeah. So once you've identified what you want, and it's so true what you're saying, Alan, because if you don't have an end destination in mind, you're never going to end up where you want to be, right? It's like your brain doesn't know where to take you. You haven't defined the ultimate destination. So therefore you go nowhere. And that's how you wake up in the same job that you don't like 20 years later, thinking, what the fuck just happened? So after you get really clear about what you want, what's going to happen is your brain is going to come up with a million different reasons why that's going to be hard, why it's going to be difficult, why you can't do it. That's where the second guessing comes up, all the fear comes up. And so depending on the specific thoughts you're having about achieving that goal, that's what I would work with clients to coach them on of, okay, how can we think about this differently? Because if you have identified, say, that you want to start your own company, and your brain is telling you, once you identify that, your brain is telling you that there's no way you can do that because you've never done it before. If you stay stuck in that mindset, you're never going to take the leap. You're going to listen to your brain and you're going to believe that that's true. And so that becomes a very individualized process, which is why people work with me or work with other one-on-one coaches, is your brain is going to tell you a whole bunch of lies to keep you safe and stuck doing exactly what you are. Because even if you don't love what you're doing right now and you know it's not you, it's familiar, and your brain will always choose familiarity over passion unless you intentionally redirect it.
Yeah. So I see that all the time with my clients also. But what do you think changes in the person's mind, or how can you encourage people before they come to you? They've been wrestling with this for a while. You were able to very quickly, or it seems relatively quickly, within a 15-month period of time, realize that you weren't in the right space. You identified your goal and you went to achieve it.
Finding a job you fucking love is SYCK trick number 6.
What are some of those blockers from stopping people from taking action, either speaking to you as a coach or doing it on their own? What are some of those blockers that you see, and what's some advice you have for people of getting over those obstacles?
Yeah, for sure. So the biggest block is the fear of doing new things, the fear of the unknown, the fear of doing something different. And actually, in my latest podcast episode, Breaking Free from the Grind, I think it's episode 19. I just did an episode on overcoming the fear. It's called like Breaking Free from the Fear of Doing New Things in Your Career. So if anyone wants to check that out, it's a great episode. I'll check that out. But it really is fear that holds people back first and foremost. our thoughts create the emotions we feel. So if you're feeling afraid about leaving your job or about doing something different, it has nothing to do with the fact that you're making a potential change. It has everything to do with the fact of how you're thinking about that potential change. So if you're having thoughts like, I'm going to fail, people will judge me, I've never done this before, all those are optional thoughts that are creating that fear that keeps you stuck. And so the first thing I would suggest is really asking yourself and writing out so you can see it. What am I so afraid of?
Yeah.
Getting really clear on what your fears are. Because what will happen, a couple of things will happen. When you list everything out and you start to put some emotional distance and space, you can see, okay, these are just sentences on a page. This isn't real. I mean, these are sentences that came from my head on a page, right? Some of them you'll look at and say, oh, like, I don't even believe this, or this isn't even a valid fear. And then the ones that are sticky, the ones that you look at and you read and you're like, holy shit, yeah, I'm very terrified that I'm going to fail at this, would ask you to challenge yourself and ask yourself, how might this not be true? So how might it not be true that you're going to fail? What if you are wildly successful? It's interesting that our brain is programmed to think negatively, right? To keep us safe and to keep us alive. But so we're always going to go to, it's natural and normal to think I'm going to fail, versus it's just as easy to deliberately change how you're thinking and say, I'm going to succeed. I recognize the fear, but I am committing to success. How can I make this work? That's the question you want to be answering. And then the other big thing that I see holding people a lot, and this, I learned this through coaching. And so that's why I think it was so easy for me to make the transition to do something else, is we think that we have to know the how before we make the move. So we think we have to know with exact detail, like for me, just to use my example, investment banking to starting my own business as a first-time entrepreneur coaching. If I would have believed this thought that I have to know the how to create a business before I ever take the leap to do so, I would 100% still be an investment banker, because you don't know the how until you actually get out there and start doing it. I mean, you can look at your job today, right? You can tell me with 100% exactness and specificity every step you took in your life and career to get you to where you are right now. But you're still here. So you don't actually need to know the how to create exactly what you want, to create the career you want. You just have to be willing to start taking action and trying it.
Getting over the fear of doing new things is next up with SYCK trick number 7.
Talk a little bit about your podcast and what you cover in your podcast and where people can find that. That's the first question.
Yes, for sure. I'm a big fan and supporter of podcasts. So it's exciting that, you have this now. So I have a weekly podcast called Breaking Free from the Grind. And essentially what it is me sharing all of the same tools and techniques, both mindset and skill set based tools and techniques that I use on my one-on-one clients. And so it's focused on helping you break free from the mental and emotional grind of your career, so you can feel less stress at work and feel more confident and be 100% clear on what you want to do, so that you can go out and create a life and career you fucking love. And I always say, the grind is a mindset. So once you learn how to think differently about your job, you change your entire relationship with your job. And therefore you change your entire relationship with your life, because you can go out and create what you actually want. So you can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And new episodes drop every Friday at 9 Eastern.
Nice. And the name of it again?
Breaking Free from the Grind.
Breaking Free from the Grind. Great. Second question I have for you. I ask all my guests, and if you drop so much SYCK advice here on the Acceleration Nation.
SYCK trick number 8 gives you advice on moving forward with your career.
What is one additional SYCK trick that you recommend to your clients or others that they can take right now and move forward in their careers?
Yeah. So one thing I would say, I'll focus it on career clarity and getting unstuck. And if you're in a place where you're trying to figure out what you want, whether that's next or whether that's 20 years from now, One of the biggest ahas I've ever had was that, deciding what you want to do next and feeling certain about that decision, it's actually two decisions. The first decision is you deciding on the thing. So for me, it was deciding to start my own business as a coach and leave investment banking. That was decision one. That decision did not make me feel certain it was the right one. What created the certainty was me making a second decision, which is I have made the right decision in doing this. You have to make both of those decisions. That's how you make a change. And that's how you create a feeling of certainty it's the right change for you. So often I see clients, and I was like this myself for a long time, we wait for an answer to come to us. Like we're waiting for some external sign to come to us. You have to create the sign. You create the certainty with two decisions. Decide what you want next. Decide that it is the right thing for you.
Awesome. That's fantastic, SYCK advice. The last question I have for you, you talk about people can follow you on breaking free from the grind. Is there any other way that people can follow you or reach out to you?
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram at Amelia Noel Coaching. So AMELIA Coaching. And then you can also check me out on my website, www.amelianoelcoaching.com. And there's a button to shoot me an email and get in touch if you'd like to get in touch that way too.
Awesome. Well, I knew going into this one that this would be an awesome conversation, and you exceeded my expectations. So thank you so much, Amelia. I learned a lot from you that I'm going to take and share with my clients and actually take some of those for myself as well. So thank you for your time and your insights and your advice.
Well, thank you, Alan, for having me. And I'm so excited for this podcast, your podcast, to be out in the world, helping so many people.
Me too.
Yeah.
Any week now. Thanks, Amelia.
That's 8 SYCK tricks to help you steer your career. A huge thank you to Amelia for all of that enlightening information. Connect with us at syckpodcast.com. That's SYCK. On the website, you're going to see a button and it says, Leave Alan a voice message. Click that and talk to us. Alan, you had mentioned that you listen to each and every one of those voice messages.
I do. Please drop a message. I listen to them all.
All right, Alan, what's in store for the next episode?
Russ, we have a good one. We have another one of our JAM sessions coming up, and JAM stands for Job Acquisition Method. And the specific area that we're going to be honing in on is the interview process. As a guest on this podcast, I have my program manager, Kelly O'Brien, who's a fantastic woman. She's been working with Kadima. She's going to be firing away a whole bunch of different questions at me about the job interview process. And I'll be sharing the truth. I'll be sharing how exactly to optimize and kick ass in your next interview.
We love the jam sessions. Hope you enjoyed this episode and you're going to love the next one.